Okay, welcome to the 43rd episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today, I'm excited to be speaking to Kevin Albin. Kevin served 25 years with the police in the UK, 8 years of which were with a tactical firearms team and as a negotiator. In 2002, he retrained as an international mountain leader, working across the globe, guiding on mountaineering trips and expeditions. He is an author of the book Stonechild, a fictional story about seeing the need for conservation and a change to the way we act with the environment. In 2011, he won the bronze in the Wanderlust magazine World Guide Awards for his work. His hope is that his writing will continue to spread the word on conservation and protection of all species. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, Piers. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Yeah, a pleasure. So one of the ways I kind of connect and begin the podcast is talking about how we met, and it was through a mutual friend, Graham, who I met at my sister's wedding again. I'd not seen him for a few years, but his wife is my mother's best friend, so they've known each other since their time in Hong Kong. And he was saying, you have to speak to Kevin. So we had a conversation a few weeks ago, and it was like, yeah, it'd be lovely to speak to you on the podcast. So
yeah, Graham was my boss on the tactical firearms team and has become a very good friend. And it's one of those chance conversations, I suppose, of synchronicity, where you feel we're meant to meet or meant to communicate, those sorts of things. So Graham wrote to me and said, I met this guy at the wedding, and I think you two should speak, and voila, we are here. So that's excellent.
Yeah, thank you. It was Sunday morning, I think Sunday morning after the wedding. So we were sat in my sister's front room, and we were getting really passionate about kind of trauma and leadership. And he was like, yeah, you should speak to Kevin. You're very similar. I'm like, okay. So what I'd love, and how I love to begin the podcast, is really for you to explain a bit of how you got into the work you're now doing, which is about the environment.
Sure. So we've mentioned the police. Yeah, I was a police officer. I had a change of heart, or a change of idea for careers. That was back in 2002 that I actually left the police after 25 years service. Retrained, as you've said, as an international mountain leader, and sort of tricked into some of the work to do with youth development. So taking young people away for a month on an expedition to help them learn leadership skills, problem solving, how to work as a team. When you take someone out of their comfort zone and put them into what they perceive as a hostile experience, a hostile environment, they become very attentive and they rely on you, and therefore you can impart the message or the learning that you want to impart. So it's a very useful medium to encourage people to grow. So I did that for a number of years in some fantastic places, jungles, tropical jungles and deserts, and even cold environments as well, such as up in Finland. And I also got involved in charity work. This is another thing that's very exceptional to the UK, in that people want to raise money for either they've had their own bereavement, or they themselves have suffered with an illness such as cancer, diabetes, something like that, and they want to raise money. And with that, they then climb to the top of Kilimanjaro or Great Wall of China, Machu Picchu, those sorts of almost honeypots, and they get sponsored on the back of that. And that's a really wonderful system, because everyone gains from it. Local people gain from it, the charity gains, and they gain from the experience of raising money for other people. And I then also got involved in conservation work, in that I took a contract for 3 months in Borneo, working on behalf of the Royal Society, planting hardwood trees in the largest ever biodiversity project that's been run. My team planted 22,000 trees in 3 months. I finished that, and by sheer luck, there was another expedition going in to do a mapping project in a place called Maleo Basin, very remote, very underexplored, and I replaced a leader who couldn't continue. and did another 3 months in the forest on that mapping project. So I had 6 months of living in the tropical rainforest, which blew me away, Piers. I mean, it just completely changed my life. And I gained an understanding of where we are, what we should be doing, and how we should be relating to our own kind, the indigenous peoples that live in the forest and rely on the forest, but also the whole of nature, that we should be connected to nature and we cannot live outside of it. And if we do, we will suffer the consequences, and so will nature itself. So we need to do something about it. So I geared myself more to understanding about climate and nature and biodiversity, went on a number of courses, got some qualifications, and then got involved in writing articles for magazines, expressing my feelings, doing podcasts such as this one. So thank you for the opportunity. It's really good. And it's grown from there. And yes, it's somewhat frustrating. People are not necessarily listening, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about that. But I'm motivated. I want to make changes. I want to save people. Every minute part of a degree that we save in temperature, we're talking about, we will save lives without a doubt. And the reverse, every degree higher we go, the more lives will be lost. So it's the greatest crisis that our humankind has ever faced, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. So that's me. That's where I've arrived at. There's some add-ons there. I've done other bits and pieces. In the police, in the tail end of my career, I got seconded to work with young people with the Prince's Trust. I got involved in police welfare, so the police officers suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder, and using the outdoor environment to try and encourage them to heal. I trained as a mental health first aider, and I've been involved in volunteering as a listener. So that there's that empathetic side as well, which I enjoy doing. I enjoy giving back to people and trying to help them on their path. So yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. I'm enjoying it.
Thank you, Kevin. Sounds fascinating. I love your 6 months in the jungles. I mean, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned you just lived in a hammock.
Yeah, it was 6 months in a hammock, minus 1 day when I came in between the two expeditions. Yeah, so that in fact, I'll give you an example, which is pertinent to me, perhaps. After the time I came out and I booked into quite a luxurious hotel, the Hyatt, in fact, in Kota Kinabalu, and got my key, got a newspaper that I hadn't seen any news for 6 months, wandered up to the room and went into the toilet, in fact, and there was a marble toilet that I was going to sit on. You know, I'd been going to the toilet in a hole in the ground for 6 months. The light came on automatically, whereas in the jungle at 6 o'clock in the evening, everything is pitch black. And the emotion was too much. I burst into tears. I couldn't cope with coming back into that sort of luxury when I'd been in the forest. And the reason being is that being in the forest, I'd spent 6 months with nature. So washing and swimming in the river, cooking our meals, sleeping in a hammock. Physically, I was very fit because your skeletal muscles have to support you all the time. There's no comfy sofa to lounge in. You're supporting yourself. You squat down on the ground sometimes when you're eating, those sorts of things. So I felt physically fit. I'd been away from all sorts of pollution. I've been eating and sleeping well. And so it was a wonderful experience. And of course, I've been connected to nature. You wake with the sound of gibbons and insects buzzing all the time. And it's just fabulous. And as I say, it blew me away. It completely changed my philosophy on life and how I was living and everything that came with it. Yeah. It's a very, very good experience. And I've been back many times. And I have now an 18-year-old son, and he's come back several times with me, and he's experienced the same sorts of things. We've lived with a local people, local tribe, swam in the rivers, fished and canoed, and dug out tree for a canoe. It's just a wonderful experience. And it's led me to not believe, just be absolutely convinced. This is what we're missing. This is where we've gone wrong, where we've gone so fast into technology or so fast into the modern world In very short period of time, 2/3 of the world's population will be living in a town or city. And we've lost our connection with nature, and in doing so, we're losing our connection with each other. We're being absorbed by material things, and consequently, we're eating, sleeping, drinking, all the things that we do of the same fashion. Consequently, we're getting sick, we're not healthy, mentally we're not healthy. We don't relate to each other, we don't relate to nature any longer, and the whole world is in a state of crisis, and we need to find our way back without a doubt. The issue with climate change is that it's now reached those tipping points, and there's an expression, the cascade of tipping points, where one or two tipping points then tip the rest. We're reaching those points now. The climate crisis is accelerating, perhaps faster than scientists anticipated. We don't have that time to be deep and meaningful about our change. We need to make very radical and fast decisions, strong decisions to reduce the approach of what's coming. So we need to get deep and meaningful with nature, but we really need to appreciate that time is of an essence at the moment. We have to accelerate our attitudes.
Thank you. So one of the questions I have then is, as you're speaking, mentioned it's frustrating, and why aren't people listening?
That's a very good question, and I should think it's a multifaceted answer, because if you talk with, I've listened to some psychologists, psychiatrists, people who have said that we're very good at dealing with immediate danger. You have an accident in your car, or your house is on fire. We're very good at responding to that as human beings. We're very good at pulling out the stops and doing something about it. This is a crisis of enormous magnitude, but it's happening over generations. And we're not very good at realizing the urgency and the seriousness of this. We don't see the danger. It seems almost too far away from us. And even when something like the recent heat waves that have occurred, we're still not connecting the dots to say, heat wave, climate crisis, it really is serious. We just see it as a hot summer, or the hottest summer, even with the wildfires that are occurring. I think I read something yesterday about there are 500 or enormous number of more wildfires this year than they had in the entire 2021. So there's all sorts of statistics, but even that doesn't make us realize, because it's too long term. So interestingly, again, from those sorts of reports, is that people that deal with crisis all the time are more adept to realizing long-term crisis. So people in military, for example, doctors, surgeons, people working in intensive care, or urgent A&E, those sorts of people are perhaps more adept to actually to realizing, to recognizing long-term crisis. So the other reasons, of course, money is a big factor. People will be debating whether they get a heat pump or solar panels or an electric car, all those things that stop the use of fossil fuels, and they'll base that on the economy, what they can afford. They won't base it on survival. They won't look at it and say, I've got to stop fossil fuels because the climate crisis is getting worse and it's fossil fuels that are actually the main contributor. They don't look at that. They look at it and say, how can I afford it? So we're basing it on the economy as opposed to our survival and the survival of all living things. So there's a number of things. We're also fed, it's made difficult, we're fed misinformation all the time. Fossil fuel industry is very adept at convincing us that it's been doing that for a long time. It has a lot of money behind it, therefore its entire structure of misinformation, of persuading us, understanding what works, what can persuade us. They're very clever at doing that, and that's gone on for a long time, and we've sucked all that in. We believe it. All the things that, in the interests of selling more fossil fuels, we go along with it all the time. So even a subtle change of name, Total, changing it to Total Energies, induces us to think that it's not as bad as it is. Or green fuel. It's still petrol, it's still diesel, it's still the same thing. Whatever they add to it, it's still producing the greenhouse gases that we really must stop.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I was noticing, in this country, I know you're based in France, but fuel, and I know fuel's gone up over the world, the price. It's kind of dropped a bit this last couple of weeks. And I just saw the first year report for Shell, and they've doubled their profits this year. It's coming at 12 billion rather than 5 or 6 last year. So yeah, I struggle sometimes by going, okay, we've had this price hike, but you would have thought they would take a cut in the money that they're earning, but that's not necessarily the case.
Absolutely, and in fact, they're reliant also in us doing nothing. We're not going. The price hike is extreme. There are people all over the world without sufficient money to eat or to heat their homes or cool their homes, whatever it might be. There are people really on the breadline, but that hasn't stopped the industry from earning more money. And then they haven't changed at all. I mean, the UN secretary quoted it was an example of grotesque greed. And I can't see that it's anything other. And I think we mentioned before in our chat, I'm a very strong believer of the fossil fuel industry, which is an incredible industry. It's more powerful, I would say, than governments. It has a vast amount of money, has a vast amount of expertise. They have the capacity to save the day. They have the capacity here to really change things and go to renewables, stop the use of fossil fuels. We don't need any more oil or drilling or everything that goes with that. The planet has been harmed enough. And they could completely switch to be the heroes of the moment. And then there's no need for employees to lose their jobs. They may need retraining, and they may need help with that, which we should be willing to give and support. But they could completely change that and move that into renewable energy or whatever it takes. If it's carbon capture, if it's some other source of energy. We have a sun up there that provides as much power in one day for the whole planet uses in a year. We just need to capture it. I mean, there's statistics like that, Piers, that just makes us think, why haven't we done this sooner? And mainly the reason we haven't done it sooner is, again, a complicated answer perhaps, but we've been persuaded for a long time to continue with oil, gas and coal. But now is the time. We have to stop. We don't have any time left. This is the moment that we must do it urgently.
Thank you. So
I'd like to quote. I've got on Twitter. I follow a guy called Climate Dad. So I think it's a really cool name. And there's a Climate Mum as well. I don't know if they're related or not, but he the other day he posted something. I've written it down here, and it's addressing. It says, for information of the world leaders, and I'll just quote what he said. I'll take it down there so I can read it. He says, doing everything you can to tackle climate and ecological breakdown is very different from doing everything you can to tackle climate and ecological breakdown while maintaining economic growth. So we're still basing it on economic growth. We're still basing it on the economy. We can't do it. People talk about being on a war footing, and the great films that we've seen of the Second World War, how the nation did what it took, even at the cost of lives perhaps, but they did what it was necessary to win the war. Well, this is no different. We need to do everything we can now and urgently to actually save the day, and the fossil fuel industry could really help with that. But that's how serious it is. We can't base it on the economy.
Yeah.
And then you can say, and people say, well, yeah, but we'll lose jobs. Well, we're going to lose lives. We're already losing lives. People are already dying. People already have food and water insecurity around the world. And of course, people in Africa, for example, if you with a family and there's not enough food and water, they've got no choice but to migrate and look for it. So what's that going to bring? We already have issues with people trying to migrate. That's going to bring conflict. That's going to bring war, maybe. And this isn't scaremongering. This is just simply something that's been known for a long time, but we're not acting. What else do we? How else do we convince the world to do something about it? I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. My last podcast, I spoke to a man called Sean Chamberlain, who worked with David Fleming, and I think was involved with policy for a while in the British government, trying to put in this new green ideas. And he said exactly the same thing about economy, and I went to business school, both in France and in London. And I remember this curve, and it's like infinite growth. And I'm like, surely you can't have infinite growth. And that's the idea with, what I learned at business school is this economics. Oh, we're always going to keep growing. But that's not how the world works. You have ups and you have downs. And yet we do seem to be basing it. And that's what Sean was saying, that it's an old, I think it's an old system. Somehow we have to change this.
Sure. Yeah. There's we are beginning to think. People talk about the need for systemic change, and I think that's absolutely true. We cannot continue because we've already proven that the system we have at the moment isn't working and is dire. But people talk about that we need to change our culture, we need to change our values, we need to change our beliefs, we need to radically change the way we function. But it's so urgent now. That's going to take time. That's going to take generation after generation before we can do that. Cultural change is a very hard thing to make.
Yeah.
But what we need to do now is to make some very strong decisions about what we stop, how we stop producing greenhouse gases, and because if we could stop by some fairy godmother, we stopped it tomorrow, it would still continue for a long time, because that's the nature of carbon dioxide in particular. That's a methane. That's a greenhouse gas that lasts a long time, as opposed to methane, for example, having mentioned it, which is more potent but doesn't last as long. So there's all that sort of structure that we need to look at, but we need to take action, radical action now, to stop that production, to at least start the slowing down process, and to reduce the increasing global temperature that we're seeing. We're already at 1.1, 1.2. The Paris Accord in 2015 was looking at 1.5, no more than 2. We're currently projected to reach 3.5, which is incredible. We're seeing at 1.1, we're seeing enormous heat waves, forest fires, droughts, changes in weather. What's it going to be like at 3.5? With a potential for even going if you go much higher than that, we won't sustain life at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess one of the questions I had, which we spoke about a few weeks ago, is you have spoken to people in the oil and the fossil fuel industry, and you mentioned in a podcast I've listened to, you can't understand why are they not changing? Why are they? What's up? So I'd love you to speak a little bit about how we get these people to change, or to at least become, like you mentioned in another podcast, heroes of the moment.
The people I've spoken to, it's always quite a caged conversation, because one, they're employed by the fossil fuel industry, for example. That's their livelihood, that's their jobs. They, on a personal level, because they have families, on a personal level, they may speak about their concerns, and their worries even to say that. I'd like to have contact with people higher, CEOs, for example, people in high positions. There are a number of videos out where some of those people have been recorded. Greenpeace did a very successful sting operation on a high-level manager who talked about the fact that they could convince or control the media and the newspapers and that sort of, and allow the fossil fuel, I think it was mining or drilling, allow that to continue without any disruption from outside influences. So that, you know, that they're of an ilk, I suppose, that they have a lifestyle, they have a salary, one maintains the other, and that can't be broken. When I question often with people that earn so much money, how much money do you actually need? Mm-hmm. It's life is beautiful. It is as it is. You know, you can't just keep earning money all the time. It's something seriously wrong there. So I don't know that I've got great access to lots of influential people that could give us a very clear understanding. I can only talk from how I think they might feel or how I think them, but they must realise the situation that the world is in at the moment. Some must be feeling some sense of responsibility that, and of course the argument will be, well, you keep asking for it, so we keep producing it. But I don't agree with that. That's, you know, you could be a drug dealer saying the same thing. You know, you keep taking the drug, so I keep selling it. But that's not how the world works. And we do need the fossil fuel industry to come to some sort of realization and say, actually, as a business model, even, how long is that business model going to last? When there's a breakdown in society, we won't be driving cars. We won't be pulling up at the pump to fill up. We will be fighting for survival. Things will be very, very difficult indeed. No food, no water, or reduced amounts of food and water. We can all picture some sort of Mad Max scenario, and that will take some time, but that is still a possibility. We have such a breakdown in society that's what we end up with. So we have to avoid that at all costs. Yeah. And we have to persuade the fossil fuel industry, and we have to work alongside them. And if it's a matter of people losing jobs or people needing retraining, then we need to be supporting that, of course.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we did mention, or one of your questions perhaps, was about businesses and leaders. I feel that businesses are changing. Big businesses are changing. They've seen that. They've seen the advantages of changing because it's good for the environment. It's good as their image. It's financially, it's sound. You know, there's a huge economy to be gained by investing in renewables or making their buildings or their businesses more efficient as regards to energy loss, those sorts of things. So businesses are easily convinced to say, we need to be going down this road. And that's mainly because they're basing that on finances and reputation and being in a competitive market. And that's very instantaneous. Your shares can drop very rapidly in a moment. So that's how they invest. Governments, on the other hand, our leaders, our world leaders, don't have that perspective, I would suggest. They base it on the vote in 4 or 5 years' time. So they get carte blanche almost for 5 years doing what they want to do. There is no urgency about it. There's no real pressure, even with the likes of Extinction Rebellion and other activists who are very active, and thank you to all of them. They've got the courage to make those decisions and try and change the world. But that's no real pressure. The government aren't really affected by that, I would suggest. It's an annoyance more than anything else. It doesn't make, I'm hoping it makes a difference, but does it really affect the decisions that they should be making? They don't seem to have woken up to the seriousness of it because they're basing it on other things. They're basing it on being elected and the fact that they need votes and they need the support. But the recent UK government, they haven't had the support. We demanded that he leave, Boris Johnson leave. You know, at the moment, I believe he's still there. You know, so they do get to do what they want because they don't have the same pressure that big businesses have as regards to their finances and their reputation. So there's an example of a systemic change that we need. That system does not work. We need a different approach on how we are governed, how we vote for, if we vote, a complete change. I don't know what the answer is, but we do need change because this isn't working.
Yeah. That's definitely something I'm very passionate about. I mean, I was just mentioning before, or is it, you know, Nick Duffell's book, Wounded Leaders. If you get a chance to read that, it's amazing. Just not just about our leaders and why they are like they are, lack of empathy, being shut down, you know, this idea of a cold heart or closed heart, I think they call it, the work of Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory, all of these things. I also see how it stretches through many generations, that the world leaders, it's almost, you know, what Nick talks about as this trauma, that things like boarding school, and not just the boarding school, but also how they are brought up by their parents, because they've come from that same kind of background, quite cold. And I guess I agree totally how we're being governed. It's like, it feels that because we learn in these environments, I guess that's my projection of these leaders, learn to be very cold. They can't have empathy. They're not allowed feelings. Therefore, when they step into leadership, they have that same thing. They don't care about the environment unless, because they've learned to shut down. They can't feel. They have that lack of empathy. And, you know, and I guess, you know, how do we? And I guess we've got to think of these solutions quite quickly.
When we mentioned that before, you welcomed me to the term boarding school syndrome, which I'd never heard of. But you're right. There are various institutions, some schools, of course, military training schools, where we breed or train leaders to be leaders. But I'm not aware of any. The softer skills, the personal skills, you know, where do they come in? What about the relationship with nature and with each other? You know, if we're breeding just hard-nosed leaders, well, that's not life. Life isn't like that. We need skills. We need people with sympathy and empathy and understanding. We're complex beings. We're not just an animal that lives, breathes, and reproduces. We're people with emotions, with intelligence, with understanding, with a capacity to evolve very rapidly. All of that needs an understanding. We're not black and white, not by any stretch of the imagination at all. And if our leaders are not responsive to that, well, there's something drastically wrong, and may highlight why we're in the state we're in. So I agree with you totally. You know, those leaders. I mean, the recent pandemic we looked at, and other crises as well, we found that women leaders fared far better than male leaders. We talk about conflict, that women leaders do far better in conflict, and I support that. You know, if we can have a world full of women leaders, fantastic. You know, let's find the leaders that are actually going to do the right things.
I think the Dalai Lama.
But again, and again, that's the sort of systemic changes that we need. You know, I go back to the point that we need to be a blank sheet of paper almost, and say, right, where do we go from here, and what will work, and if it doesn't work, how do we change it, those sorts of things. But at the same time, we don't necessarily have there is still an urgent problem that we need to face, and we need to stop producing greenhouse gases. We need to stop pollution, the plastic pollution in particular. We need to stop the destruction of biodiversity. We're reliant on biodiversity, much the same as everywhere else. That's a very intricate situation to do with life. And we have the expertise. There are a huge number of people that know about this, that have written about this, that have presented this. Let's draw them in and say, right, what do we do? How do we change this now? How do we change it radically and quickly? And then long term, what do we do? What's our plan? And the world, I mean, imagine the world like that. Imagine the world where we don't have these large, harmful industries, gun, tobacco, alcohol, perhaps, all those sorts of industries that use different methods to be successful. Imagine that we have equality and equity across the board, that when we can lose racism and everyone is appreciated for whom they are. And it's just fantastic. And I can't see why that's not possible.
Yeah.
I can't see why we can't have that.
And I feel we can. I think that's what I was sharing a bit with my last podcast. I guess I feel that it's that vision, but we've also got to follow it up with action. The vision of we can have equality, we can do these things, and we've got to follow it up with action. And I think drawing on podcast guest Rod Booth, where he talks about the archetypes and this idea of the king archetype or the sovereign archetype, which is for a Jungian term, which basically talks about these deep structures within our psyche, in every human psyche, saying that the sovereign sees something needs doing, and even if no one else is doing it, he still steps up and he does something. And it's like, right, we have the vision, right? We want equality, we want all these things, right? Let's set some projects up. Let's just do it. And I love what Buckminster Fuller said. He was kind of a natural scientist, but he said, let's, not try and fix the old system. Just create a new system.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing, kind of with the idea of government, that's something which really came up for me during lockdowns and the pandemic, is lots of little communities got together and supported each other, whether it was WhatsApp group, right, I'm going to the shops, can I get something for you? We had this in Hebden, where I live, in the floods, a bit like you said, this instant crisis. A flood happened. There was about 4,000 or 5,000 people the day after the flood, brooms and brushes and kind of spades, clearing the streets, washing it all down. And someone asked the local government, well, which of you organized it? And they said, not us. It was just the people, the goodness of the people. So if we can somehow set, almost like these mini communities, drawing our energy to getting food, water, doing what we can on one hand, the micro, but the macro as well. We do need to change policy, these bigger businesses. But surely if we draw our kind of money and our energy away from them, we find other ways of, and I don't know the way of running a car without fossil fuel, but there must be, like you say, solutions.
Yeah. And we have much of that technology already exists. We have the capacity as human beings to invent. We're intelligent. We're good at solving problems. And here is the major problem that we've ever faced, and we're good at solving it. We can solve it. We just need the will. We just need to make that decision, be it personally, be it at a government level, whatever it takes. We just need that will to say, okay, there's the problem. Let's get on and solve it, and let's see where we go from there. So it's there. It's not as though we don't know how to solve the crisis. We do know how to solve it. Just we're choosing not to.
Yeah. It almost feels like every day we need to be guided. What are the steps we need to do every single day? Whether it is, right, I don't know, have a meeting with the local community, grow some food. It's almost like we need to be given this thing to do every day, and gradually that will incrementally change.
Sure, and it's. I trained as a climate reality leader under the former Vice President Al Gore, which was absolutely fantastic training. It opened my eyes to that. but they ask us to go forward and do acts of leadership, try to convince people, do podcasts again like this, write articles, and whatever it takes to try to be involved. And they, one of the things that there is to look at every decision that you make throughout a day and base it or have some basis on that decision about the environment. So I'm going to go shopping. Okay, am I going to take the car? Can I walk? Should I take public transport? Okay, that's decided, right? Shopping, do I take my own bags, not plastic bags, reusable bags, my shopping bag that I use again? You know, all those sorts. So every decision that we make throughout the day, just take 3 seconds of what's the influence on that on the environment and the way we live our lives. And if we all did that, the change would be enormous. And it doesn't take much. It doesn't take, you know, that very quickly that becomes a habit and the norm, the new norm. So it's perfectly achievable.
Yeah. Thank you. So I guess one of the things I would love for you to talk about is you wrote a book during lockdown. I'd love you to talk a bit about this. So it's the book Stonechild.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I'll just show you the cover, if I may.
Beautiful.
So it actually came about back in 2011, Piers. I was working in London, working on some corporate development programs, which was kind of a sort of glorified treasure hunt. British Telecom or another big industry came to this company that I was working for as a facilitator, and then we'd do this treasure hunt and we'd examine how they were working as a team, how they were communicating, etc. You know, very common of that practice in that period. And we were in front of a statue, the Royal Artillery statue in London, and my clients were taking ages, and it was a hot day, and I was kind of frustrated, thinking, you know, come on, it's not that difficult. And I pictured the statue coming to life and giving them the answer, saying, "Come on, move on. It's not difficult." You know, and it was a thought that stuck with me. And I thought, what would it take? You know, how could statues come to life? That was the first thing. So I thought, well, the former person, Sir Winston Churchill, for example, he's dead, but he's embodied in spirit by a statue that we've created. And why would he come to life? Well, because the crisis is so severe that he comes to life to help us, to say, you really need to act now. Well, that's too simple. So then I thought, well, yes, actually, but they don't believe that we're going to act. So their intention is then to take over because they want to survive as statues. And the story grew and grew. And then I wrote it, and I was very pleased with it. It got picked up by some literary agents, but never actually, they refused it in the end, the manuscript. It's a very difficult market to get into. It was based on young adult eco-fiction, I suppose. And then during the confinements, I thought, you know, I should look at that again, and I rewrote it and then published it. And so it's about the statues coming to life, and it starts with Sir Winston Churchill, who advises the government. The main character is a young woman of 15 years of age who doesn't believe the statues are there for a benign reason. She believes, she doesn't trust them. She ends up with an amazing adventure, being chased all around London, having to solve clues, meeting the statue of Sherlock Holmes, who was a big fan of mine, and one of the reasons I joined the police, would you believe? And so it's a you know, a great adventure around London with lots of the sights of London, lots of famous statues, and I introduce some of the history of those statues, those sort of thing, in a roundabout way. But I also look at the issues to do with adolescence and what people are going through, and it terminates in a huge battle between the statues in Trafalgar Square and the police. And you know, I question, you know, how do the police shoot the statues when they're made of stone or metal, those sorts of things. So I was very pleased, and it's been well received. And but the message is there. The message is that we need to act. It's I think fiction, be it in film or writing is a very powerful medium in getting people to see the future. I've quoted this before the Star Wars. None of us could really picture a galaxy far, far away. It was beyond our comprehension. We needed the likes of the writer and the film producers to actually create that image for us, and then we could see it. And it fascinated us, and we wanted more. We could see that future, and that's we wanted that, interested us and entertained us, certainly. Well, this is no different with the climate crisis, in my view. There is a space, there is a place for writers to picture how the world could be, or both good or bad, whichever one works, and then encourage people to believe in that, and that belief then becomes an action, and that action then results in change. So there's room for everyone to be making a difference, and that was my purpose, Piers. I couldn't work as a guide any longer because of COVID. And when I work as a guide, I'm directly in contact with my clients, maybe in the jungle, for example, when I have an opportunity of speaking to them, convincing them, listening to their views, answering their questions, and all of that stopped over COVID. So getting the book rewritten and published, putting it out there, was my way of continuing making a difference and trying to interact with people. It's been a fascinating process. I really enjoyed it. I'm really pleased with the book. Even now, when I pick it up, it makes me smile. And I'm hoping it'll make a difference. I'd like someone, if anyone that's listening, I'd really like someone to make it into a film, because with CGI and the effects that are available today, I think that would make a fabulous film. Statues coming to life and big battles and things. But yeah, it's been good fun.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I haven't read it yet. I will have a read at some point. And I really love that idea of the positive, because I often see, I was reflecting that a lot of Hollywood films, it seems to be quite apocalyptical, the view of the future. And like you said, it depends what we use our vision for. And I feel we need to keep coming back to the vision that we can do this. Keep coming back that, no, we can do, like you say, find this equality, this dropping racism, coming back into joy. And I know that we can. I was reading Rutger Bregman's book, Humankind, and he talks about that idea that we are told that we are bad as human beings. We're inherently evil or bad. And he says, actually, no, that's not true. We're actually good. And he basically spends the book just quoting all the good aspects we are, these. And so, so I guess I really love that you have this story which promotes, we can do something.
Because we're as a species, of course, we're evolving, and we've evolved in a very short period of time. But if you take us back, I don't know, a couple of centuries, and look at the manner of how we lived our lives and how we treated each other, we've evolved. We're evolving all the time to be better, to have a greater understanding, to be more just. We do have issues to do with equality and equity and racism, those things, but we're tackling those. We are looking at that. And Rome wasn't built in a day. We are looking at ways of how we evolve, and given the time, we will evolve and get better and better and better. So I agree with you totally. We are fundamentally good, and we are learning to be better. We can't look at ourselves as being fundamentally bad. That's not true. And when you look around the world, to say, we could identify the government as the villain, or the fossil fuel as a villain. That's not true either, because they are human beings. They have their own lives and their own beliefs, but fundamentally we are good beings, and we want the good things. There are injustices and there are vicious crimes. I saw a lot of violence and bad things in the police, but fundamentally people are good. They're influenced by all manner of things: their upbringing, their poverty, their lifestyle. Those sorts of big influences on people. And we need to believe in ourselves and believe that we can do this. Now, there's a real problem with our youth today. There's a global survey that was done of 10,000 people, and 60% of the youth, I think it was between 16 and 25 years of age, but 60% of those interviewed were very or extremely worried about the future. That's huge. We should really take note of that. And you think about young people who have, my own son, he's just turning 18. He's studied. He's doing well, but he's looking forward to a life of, as you can imagine, as a son of a guide, he's travelled a lot already, and he's looking forward to a life of doing that and having a life of a young person. Well, much of that has been put on hold because of climate change, because of the situation of the world, because of wars, because of all sorts of things, that the issues that we're in. And of course, people are very, very worried. A very high statistic showed that people felt that the world is doomed, or they're extremely frightened, or another statistic was very high again, 45%, something like that. Think about this on a daily basis. We can't raise our young people like that. It's not fair. They haven't done anything. They haven't contributed to climate change. They weren't born. But we can't have our young people in such a state of worry and being so upset. We need to address that. We need to do something about that, and very quickly.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I guess that was something I kind of wanted to delve into, is just about your work with the teens, in the jungles. What was I saying? The importance of, I've obviously worked as a scout leader and a forest school teacher. This was the place I worked at, was next to a main road in a woodland in Manchester. And yet these kids, they got so much out from being in the woods. So I'd love you to share a bit of your experience. You mentioned at the beginning this idea of us needing to reconnect to nature. So is that maybe something that we can do? Because I think one of the issues I see is that we feel very disempowered. There's nothing I can do. Can we, because our innate, I love what you said, and I've heard this before in my forest school training, that for 3 million years, our ancestors have lived outside. In the last 300 years, we've learned to more live in towns. And now you mentioned 60% now live, or 75% live in towns or cities. Is that a way that we can just be proactive every day for us to get outside, sit by a tree? It might be in a little park, but somehow reconnecting to that birthright. Because if we look at the figures, 300 years compared with 3 million, isn't that 99.9% of our existence as humans has been outside or been in connection to nature?
Sure. And in the past, there's been one or two governments that have tried to bring that in as a matter of the curriculum, for example. Encouraging outdoor leaders such as yourself and myself to take on schools, to provide for schools and other youth services to get people into the outdoors to experiencing that. The company that I've mentioned, where I used to take them overseas for a month, that's a very powerful medium. And I've seen some wonderful things of young people turning life around. People that are still in contact with me now. My first expedition, I think, was in 1999, and I'm still in contact with people. They've grown up, they've got families, jobs of their own. That's marvelous to see and hear their responses. An example, one of the things we used to do a lot in Borneo, once the team was settled and had some capacity about them, in that they were familiar with their surroundings of living in the jungle. We would go upriver, sometimes in the river. You wade in the river because there's no footpaths as such. You get in the river, it's the easiest way of making progress. And we drop a person off at a point out of sight of the next person. And then say, I'll be back in an hour to come and collect you all. And the time is just to sit in the jungle, or or squat in the jungle. You don't sit on the jungle because you get bitten by ants, but it's to squat in the jungle and sit there and just have time on your own and listen to the sounds. Your own senses will be heightened. You'll reflect on life. And it turned out that an hour was never enough. You know, they always used to say, no, don't leave me here. This is marvelous. So there's a number of things that we can do as human beings. And you're right, you don't need to be in the jungles of Borneo. You can do that in a local park in the centre of London. Of course you can. And if you want solitude, choose it outside of the day. You know, go early in the morning, late at night, something along those lines, so to have a bit more of a solitude, a bit more of a personal experience. But we do need that. We need that as human beings. We need to have that connection with nature. We need to hear the birds singing. We need to see an insect crawling across the ground or whatever it might be. We need those experiences. And once we see that and we start to value that, then we'll start to value that insect or that bird or that blade of grass struggling to grow. You know, whatever it is, we place ourselves in the universe, we place ourselves in life. Then we'll have a greater understanding, and it'll be so much more difficult then to harm that life. To do the things against it, because we're part of it. We see that connection. We will suffer less mental health issues. We're in the outdoors, means we'll have greater physical health. We'll have less conflict with each other because we're more at peace with the world. You know? Behavior breeds behavior. So, you know, it's the answer. Without a doubt, it's the answer. You know, and people will diss it, of course, but okay, people have city lives and have immersed themselves in that. I get that, of course, you know, but just take time out. Just take, you know, an hour out of the day or an hour out of the week and just experience it and gain an understanding and see how you feel at the end of that. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that. I love that because it's like you're saying, it feels so disempowering. So to actually have something I can do, and I think sometimes maybe because you've lived in London, I've lived in London. Remember my decision to leave London, and I've lived in cities probably from 94 through till 2000. One day I was working in this office and someone said to me, "What's the weather like outside?" And I looked to my right and I was on the second floor, and it was like 10-floor building, and the window was on another side of the building. And I was like, oh, no idea. And this was probably March, April time. I looked to my left and it was just a wall. I looked in front, you know, it was closed. Behind were offices. And I'm like, I can't even see outside. And I was like, I have no idea. It's probably an overcast day. And they came back inside after they'd been out, and they says, it was a beautiful sunny day out there. I'm like, I have no idea, because I'd come in the dark. And I feel that, you see that in the cities I felt that real disconnection from nature. And I found a lot of solace in places like the Peace Gardens on the South Bank and places like that. So yeah, that, you know, thank you.
And it's our interaction with each other as well. So we, as well as being part of nature, but it's part of nature as a species of nature. So I have a little anecdotal story of working with a school group of younger children, of 14, 15, maybe 16 at the most, working in the desert in Sahara in Morocco. We were camped outside a village. And villages, people know that these teams that come in here usually have some sort of medical training or some sort of medicines with them. A young girl came with her slightly older brother. She'd caught a toe in the cog of a bicycle and taken the top of her toe, etc. There are rules about what you do about treating and those sorts of things, but you can give immediate first aid and some relief to the pain that she was in. One of the students that was with me, a young 14-year-old girl, she asked what could she do. So I got her to put some gloves on and talk to the patient, clean the wound, you know, some basic first aid, those sorts of things. And that was done. And then the next day, someone else came, and then someone else came from the village, because of course the word is passed, and you end up getting involved in what you can get involved. It's human nature, you know. Anyway, to cut long story short, at the debrief, where everyone talks about their experiences, she stood up, and she was a student that had been described by the teacher as someone head in the clouds, doesn't know what day of the week it is. And she gave this presentation about, I know exactly what I'm going to do in my life. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to do this. I'm going to save it. I mean, I was almost in tears. It was monumental. And whereas we talk about being with nature, we also need to be talking about how we interact with each other. Yeah. In that we cannot, in the developed world, carry on in the lifestyle that we've adopted. And you can picture whatever you picture with that, be it with technology, with money, with city life, whatever you picture as the modern world. We cannot continue in that sense without helping others who have less, who don't have the equality or equity. We cannot not give to them. We cannot not help them with the climate crisis or fresh water, food, energy sources. We have to look back and say, right, what needs doing? And we're making promises. The various COPs, Conference of Parties that have gone on, the developed world has promised $100 billion per year. We haven't paid it. Right. You know, we're not doing it. We just avoid it. We make all these promises, and we don't do it. You know, the last COP that we had in Glasgow was very disappointing in that we made noises, but we're not doing it. And there were some very passionate speeches going on saying, if you don't help us, we're dying. We don't have fresh water anymore. Maldives, which is a holiday destination for the developed world, a beautiful place, you know? They don't have any fresh water there. The sea level rise has infiltrated the aquifers of fresh water, and now having to ship water in all the time in plastic bottles of all things, of course. So we need to wake up to this, and we need to be responsible for our actions, because it's our actions. We're the ones that have produced more carbon, greenhouse gases. So they're not responsible for it, but they're the ones that are suffering. They don't have the infrastructure to cope with climate change. We talk about mitigation, that's trying to stop the climate crisis, and we talk about adaptation, that's how we live, how we survive. They don't have the means to survive. We have to help them, and we have to look back at it. And I feel very passionate about that. The term we use is climate justice. And it was a term I hadn't heard of until I did the climate reality training under Al Gore. And I'm very, very passionate. As an ex-policeman, of course, I'm dead against any form of injustice. But yeah, I mean, that's a really, really important factor that we need to wake up to. And that's related, Piers, because whereas we haven't woken up to nature and we don't see ourselves as part of it, we don't see ourselves as part of the rest of humanity. Yeah. You know, we're not waking up to the fact that these people have a need, and a desperate need, and people are already dying. We haven't woken up to that. We live our lives, and we're fed stuff from the media, which is very controlled, in my opinion. You know, we have to look outside the box. We have to go and do our own research. We have to gain our own understanding. We have to quantify that understanding, and then we need to do something about it. We act where we have the courage to do it, and where we don't, we support those that do, and we convince our governments and our leaders to say, right, now's the time. You have to make changes.
Yeah, yeah, I can really feel your passion. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. And what I'm hearing from that as you speak is, you know, so a couple of things we can do. One is to get out into nature. The second thing was some act of service every day as a human being. Is like, how can I serve in whatever way? Yeah. You know, I see my project, it might be scouts, or it might be young people, or it might be growing food, or whatever the project is, but some act of service, as you mentioned, that girl, it's like, you know, I almost feel we are as humanity very immature. It's all about me or what's in it for me. But when we actually connect to our purpose as more adults of how can I serve? And it's like we come alive. If we can get enough people, and I've heard stories that it only needs 3% of the global population to really wake up, because it's always been a small amount of people who've got passionate about change, who've made those big changes. So if we can get enough people to go, right, let me serve, let me do something every day.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned, making decisions on a daily basis, on an action basis. You know, I'm about to do this. What's the effect on the environment? Well, let's think about what's the effect of what's happening to other people, how we relate to our own kind.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just being reflective of what we're doing. We can't bludgeon our way through life just because it pleases us. That's very selfish and very destructive, and that's why we are in the situation we're in at the moment. So we have to reevaluate the way we live our lives.
Yeah. Thank you. Fascinating. I guess one of the other questions I had was, I know you went to boarding school, and a lot of the people who listen to my podcast have been to boarding school. I know you went age 16, so A levels. But I'd love you to share a little bit just about your experiences of that. And as you've reflected, you mentioned boarding school syndrome, you coming across that term. You know, how was it for you, Kevin?
I think I'm arriving there at 16 and not younger. And as a 16-year-old, I was, you know, I already had a girlfriend, I had a motorbike, probably drinking some beer. So I was a bit more established in life. My reasons for my parents were moving, and there was a bit of friction between myself and my father. So it was the solution for me to leave home at 16 years of age and go to boarding school. So I was ready to adapt to it. But having said that, I saw certainly a certain amount of bullying, a certain amount of peer pressure, both from teachers and other students, you know, the prefects, the house boy, those sorts of things. You know, you had to conform into that situation. You had to do your duty, certainly, or you had to play the game if you didn't want aggravation from other people. Now, there will be some that say, yeah, but that's character building. That's what it's all about. That's how we develop leaders or strong business people or those. Yeah, okay. But where was the softness in there? Where was the personal skills of understanding and developing people's softer skills or other skills, such as communication skills or problem solving skills or you know, those conflict skills? There's no looking at how you solve a conflict skill when you're being bullied. You know that bullying in schools at the moment is being more and more highlighted as a gross problem. Those sorts of things. So I only did 18 months, Piers, and then I sort of completed my A levels and left school, and I was very pleased with it. It was. You know, I was pleased to have perhaps done it, but equally pleased to have left. But I saw some people that had been there. Mine was a boys' school, in fact. I saw boys that had been there since very tender ages, and I felt they were very, I use the word institutionalized, but they were very much part of that system and didn't know anything else, didn't know that outside life of life as such. Yeah. I got sick with glandular fever, spent a week, maybe 10 days in isolation. I really struggled with that. No one came to see me. A very stern matron that only appeared 3 times a day with meals. I was running a high fever. There was no love and care at all. You know, even as a 16-year-old, you know, still an adolescent, still relatively a child, and anyone that's ill, That's a memory I really do not like. I think when I am ill, that's it's something I feel now. I feel an isolation. I need the company of someone because I don't feel well with myself, not just sick, but well in myself. And I think that's probably come from that experience at boarding school. So it lacked that comfort. And you can say it's a boys' school, it's a boarding school, and it makes boys into men. I don't concur with that. I think it's going to be quite harmful, and I think we are a species that we've already mentioned. We're a species that needs tenderness and care and understanding and comprehension and compassion. They are human traits, and if we don't have those human traits, then what are we?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Nick Duffel, in one of his articles in The Guardian, I think in 2014, talks about, one of the things in order to be a great leader is to make great decisions, is to have empathy. But as you could see from your experience, empathy wasn't, that compassion, those softer skills are not taught. So a lot of our leaders are lacking a lot of information when they're making decisions. And I feel it's paramount that you are able to make, and I'm never going to find it in this book, but maybe I will. Maybe it'll be a luck. There's this morning I was reading something. Maybe it was to do with some I can't remember. But someone basically mentioning about Tory leadership, if you look back, that often they've made really poor decisions. If you look over the last few hundred years, it was some historian. And he's like, if you look at the time, often their decisions, and it's not trying to blame, but a bit like, if we can shine the light to go, okay, this is not working, let's create a new system. Let's bring healing. Like you said, let these leaders, the Boris Johnsons, the Rishi Sunaks, let them be the heroes of the moment. And it's bringing that, for me, that softer side in, bringing that love and care in, bringing that vulnerability and that authenticity that, this is the experience I went through. It hurt. And now I'm willing to heal, and we can heal. And I do feel these are the heroes of the moment, if we can really see that. And they need to go through this gateway, through this portal into,
because when a child, whatever age that person is, goes to a boarding school, they've been removed from the family unit. Now, there will be exceptions where the family unit is perhaps not very healthy for whatever reason, but they've been removed from the love and care and tenderness of their parents, and then placed into an institution. Now, if that love and care isn't replaced by some other means, teachers, matron, friends, those sorts of things, then something is missing in that development of that child. There's no doubt about that. And if that then later manifests itself, if I can feel the feelings I feel now about when I was sick and isolated for a week from everyone, and that stayed with me all my life, then of course that can be exactly the same as anyone that loses out. And imagine a child of 8 going to boarding school and then losing that tenderness from his mother. That's going to have a profound effect, and it may be well hidden, but it's going to have a profound effect in the development of that child, without a
doubt. Yeah. Thank you. So to start drawing the interview kind of in now, what last words, or how do we draw this? What is your, the final words to people?
That's a tough question. I think there is a part of us which is I'm trying to use the right words here, sort of a spiritual, an inner self, an inner belief, an inner understanding. We are very complex. We suffer with a fragility of our health, and there's a variety of reasons for that. Some of it that is the food that we're eating, or the lifestyles that we have, the abuses, be it tobacco, drugs, alcohol, those sorts of things. That takes its toll. But inside each and every one of us is the capacity to have a good life, do the right things. There is an inner self that wants to come out, wants to express itself, wants to be happy. And I think the answer to that is down the road that we've been discussing, to do with how we interact with each other, how we perceive our place in the world, how we help each other to realize their expectations, our expectations, how we interact with nature and all living creatures. There's no division in my mind as regards to a plant that is growing, an animal that is running through the forest, and us in our lifestyles. There's no difference. One isn't greater than the other. One isn't more deserving of the other. We are all living beings. And I'm not a religious person. I think there is a place for religion, but that's not my choice. I just completely believe in the fact that there is a possibility of having an existence of all living things that lives in harmony. And we are evolving. We are trying to get there. I believe we will get there. But along the way, we have something that is so severe that it's threatening our existence and the existence of all living creatures. And we need to address that now, urgently, with enormous amount of effort, some very brave decisions. Otherwise, we're going to lose. We're not going to realise what we are capable of, and that's going to be a shame. That's going to be really sad. And we should do that. We should rise up together and say, right, okay, let's put our minds and efforts to it. That would be my party message. That would be my wish, certainly. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And as you speak, I can feel this idea of not doing it alone is like, and I say this to all my guests, is if I can support you in any way, please reach out. And also realizing that there's so many beacons of light doing the work you're doing. It's like, yes, it's not as if I'm doing it on my own anymore. It's now, in the work I do with the boarding school syndrome, there's hundreds of people out there doing it. It's like, I know that it's going to change. It is changing. In the last week, there's been, the head of English rugby has spoken up saying, it's time for these schools to close. So many different people are speaking up. And I feel the same with you. It's like you say, the tipping point, I feel the tipping point for positivity that, these things can really change now in the positive.
And there's, I talk about my own organisation that I belong to, the Climate Reality Project. There are many of those, the youth development, youth activists that are going on. We know about Greta Thunberg, but there are many of them, and the youth movement is moving forward and gaining great momentum. I would urge people that it may be human nature that we find a negative thing in something, and therefore dismiss the whole of the subject. And a good example would be lithium batteries and electric vehicles. Okay. So I have an electric car and I have an electric motorbike as well, as it happens. But when I mention that, people will always harp onto one thing. It will be usually the lithium batteries, which are already in the stage of changing to sodium batteries, something different. Okay, but the way to dismiss having to buy an electric vehicle is by harping onto something that doesn't quite work or isn't quite good, and therefore we didn't dismiss the whole project. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. So what I'd urge those people to say is that whatever, electric vehicles aren't the perfect solution, I accept that, but they're not the solution of burning fossil fuels, which is what's causing us the harm. We need to come away from that. the things that are putting the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We need to find a way. The way we find may not be the perfect solution. No more than we're perfect human beings. We are evolving. Electric vehicles are evolving. All the renewable technology isn't the perfect solution, but it is evolving. And I'd ask people to stop arguing or raising those sorts of points, those arguments, to say, give the new technology, give the new way of life a chance. Embrace it, accept it. It's not perfect. But it is better than what we currently have. It's better than the fossil fuels that we've been burning for such a long time. Let's embrace that and support others. That I get in the articles and the social media that I posted, I get a lot of backwash of people arguing, and it's pointless. It's sometimes it's harmful because it's quite rude. But it's pointless in moving forward. We cannot stay doing what we are. So that's simple. We cannot stay with fossil fuels. It will be the end for us. We have to move away from that. We don't yet have perhaps all the perfect solutions, but we're moving in the right direction. And I'd say to anyone that's of that ilk, please get behind it. Let's move it forward, because we don't have the time. The time is no longer there. Yeah. We discovered the planet. Carl Sagan did one of these Senate hearings back in, I don't know, late 70s, I think it was. The fossil fuel industries, the scientists in 1978 published a paper saying their product was heating the atmosphere. So it was known since then. We've lost all of those years to a point now where it's urgent and we need to act.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your work and your passion. Really feel that passion, Kevin, and big thanks to Graham for connecting us. I would never have heard of you otherwise. So yeah, really thank you for your work. And yeah, if I can support in any way, please do reach out. I think
excellent. Thank you, Piers, and likewise, thank you very much for this opportunity. This is how we get the message out, and likewise, anything. Let's stay in touch, please. I like that very much, and support each other.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. Right. See you later. Bye-bye.